All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Samir Varma. I'm a partner in Thompson Hine's International Trade Practice Group here in Washington, D.C. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar. Before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping items for you all. Today's program is being recorded, and we will send a link to all attendees within 48 hours of today's presentation. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to use the question box that's located on, at least on my screen, on the right side of the screen, to submit your questions. We'll answer as many questions as we can, either during the webinar or even at the end of the webinar. We are offering CLE credit for today's webinar. Please be sure to fill out and return the webinar affirmation form that can be found in the handout section of the control panel, also located on the right side of your screen. The form does provide instructions as to where to send the completed form. I'll announce the tracking code at the end of the hour or at the end of the program for you all to jot down. Also, on that right side in the handout panel, you'll see a download. You can download a copy of the PowerPoint slides as well as bios of today's speakers. And I think that's it. So thank you all for your interest. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the question box on the right side of your screen. And now I'd like to sort of introduce you to our panelists for today's webinar. I'm joined today by my Thompson Hine colleague, Michelle Lee, who is a Senior Managing Associate in our International Trade Practice Group. Michelle focuses her practice on assisting clients in a wide range of import and customs matters, including industries with trade remedy proceedings, and has extensive experience counseling and representing clients from the e-cigarette industry on a variety of import-related and really other matters as well. Thanks, Michelle, for joining us. I'd also like to introduce Jessica Tierney, who's a senior counsel in our product liability litigation practice. Jessica is senior counsel in the firm's, Jessica's senior counsel, and her practice focuses on issues related to compliance with the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and associated matters. Just to note, prior to joining Thompson Hine, Jessica served as regulatory counsel and later assumed the role of branch chief within the Office of Compliance and Enforcement for the set of tobacco products. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to pass this on to Jessica, who's going to begin with our agenda.
Sure. Thank you, Samir. So as you all know, this presentation will focus on importation of FDA-regulated commercial products. We'll discuss general processes and product-specific requirements in the areas of food, drugs, medical devices, and tobacco products. Next slide.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here and share with you today on the general import process on this slide for the FDA-regulated products. The purpose of this webinar is just to walk through some of the general import process and the compliance requirements for the FDA-regulated products, and to provide some tips to assist you in navigating the import process for your FDA-regulated products. Now, the import process generally starts with the importer worker, which often would be you, to collect the data required by the customs or the CBP here, and you will hand the custom broker, hand the same data to the custom brokers licensed by CBP, and custom broker will submit the tariff classification code and other mandatory product data into the customs ACE portal. The ACE, which is the automated commercial environment system, is a primary system through which the trade community reports imports and exports, and the government determines the admissibility of your shipments. ACE is maintained by customs. Now, when FDA-regulated products imported, CBP will just forward the data to FDA for further review. For all FDA-regulated products, importers are required to submit the following data elements, including country of production, FDA product code, intended use code, email and phone number of the importer of record, branded name or commercial name of the product. Now, even if the custom broker might assist you in submitting all this data, the importer of record is ultimately responsible for the accuracy of this data. Next slide, please. Next, I would like to talk about the FDA flag. FDA flag is the assigned file descriptor number for your shipments. Now, when a broker enters the tariff classification number for your imported products, their system generally will automatically generate a FDA flag associated with the tariff classification. Now, not all the tariff classification will be associated with the FDA flag, and FDA flags typically include FD1, suggesting the product may or may not be regulated by FDA. If the product is regulated by FDA, broker must submit entry information. If it is not regulated by FDA, broker should disclaim that it is not FDA regulated. The intended use of the product will make a big difference here. For example, a chemical used in drug manufacturing will be subject to FDA regulations, whereas a chemical for industrial use will not be. FD2 means the product is regulated by FDA, but it's not food products. Examples would be medical devices, tobacco products, drugs, and cosmetics products. FD3 means that the product may or may not be a food product. Again, the intended use will make a difference here. A salt used for flavoring food is FDA regulated, but the same salt used for treating raw surfaces will not be. FD4 means that the product is a food product. Example could be fish, seafood, any, even including the animal feed and the beverages. Well, we are often asked that whether a broker may determine the FDA flag by simply the product's tariff classification. We would like to say that tariff classification is basically a system that enables a uniform identification which identifies the imported and exported goods for the purposes of duty and tax collection. So your tariff classification, even though typically will help the broker to decide the FDA flag, they will not determine whether your products are FDA regulated for the same reason that I just mentioned. The intended use of your product is the indicator whether your product is often the indicator whether your products will be FDA regulated. Next slide, please.
So all FDA regulated products have certain commonalities. And the first bullet point on this slide is they must not be adulterated, misbranded, or forbidden or restricted for sale. It's important to note that FDA can refuse imports if they appear adulterated or misbranded. Adulterated products are those that are contaminated, not safe, or unapproved. And misbranded products means a label contains false or misleading information, or the project is not registered and listed if required. And Michelle touched on this briefly in her slide, but there are certain filing requirements needed for all FDA regulated products. These include country of production, product codes, affirmation of compliance codes, which are letter codes that confirm these products meet certain requirements. Intended use codes, which are just that. They designate their number codes that designate the specific use, either general or specific use. And then contact information for the importer. It's also important to note that FDA products, whether they are imported abroad or manufactured domestically, have the same requirements. Next slide. Oops, I think back to the graph, common entry errors. If we go back one more, yep, perfect. So common entry errors, it's really interesting that the most common entry errors are just errors in entering the data. The most common is those affirmations of compliance code, again, the 3-letter codes that sort of specify the type of product. Obviously, any of these errors will delay the review of the product coming into the US. Next slide.
Thanks, Jessica. Samir, would you please go back to one slide? Thank you. So when FDA reviews the data, when it gets to the FDA entry review process, FDA will have typically two tools. They may hold the entry or detain the entry. When FDA holds an entry, they may request further information or just request sample or otherwise examine the products. We often hear from our clients, what to do? I just see from my entry, my broker just tell me that I have an FDA hold. My products, my shipment has been delayed for so many days. Could you help me? When your products have been held by FDA, you could engage counsel to identify the appropriate FDA compliance officer to find out what has been delaying your shipments. And typically that would be, it could cause by many reasons. If the FDA decide to request further information, you should timely report those information to expedite the entry review process. After review, FDA may decide to release the products or detain the products. If the FDA detains the product, you can also engage counsel to identify the appropriate FDA person to understand what happens there. There are many causes that cause the detention. It could be the product is adulterated or it is contaminated if it's a food, it is mislabeled or misbranded, or the product itself is forbidden for sale, or the product is subject to import alerts. Now, import alerts is just one type of detention that allows the FDA to detain your products without physical examination. Once your product being detained by FDA, you could provide evidence to overcome the appearance of the violation, including you by going through the hearing or submitting testimony. Those evidence can be submitted in many different forms. It could range from a formal hearing with FDA or just some simple email communications with FDA. Importer can also submit a reconditional application, a great reconditioning application. A great example would be a product has been determined by FDA that is not in compliance with FDA's labeling requirements. Now, then the importer of record could submit a Form 776 to apply for reconditioning the product. Basically, is just to relabel the product as an attempt to bring the product back into compliance. Now, FDA has discretion. After the review of the application or the additional evidence, they may still find that there isn't enough or sufficient evidence to overcome the appearance of the violation, or that the reconditioned application isn't enough. Then FDA may just refuse the entry by issuing a notice of a refusal for admission. If FDA decides to issue the notice of a refusal of admission, the importer must either destroy or export the product within 90 days.
So Michelle, if I can just ask a quick question. I know you mentioned this before about expediting the FDA's review of an entry when it's being held by the FDA. And I know you have experience with this. Can you explain that a little bit more? What should a client do or an importer do?
Sure. So many of our clients have experienced FDA holds, which delay their process for many days. And as you know, 1 day of delay can cost like sometimes millions of dollars for the importers, depending on the volume of the goods. Why we have successfully assisted our clients in engaging FDA to provide some clarifications to expedite the review process. It is much better to submit accurate information at the time of entry. Submitting inaccurate or incomplete information, like Jessica mentioned, may just delay the review of your entry. First thing comes first, it is very important to find out whether your product is even regulated by FDA, because the intended use of the same product could make a huge difference whether your product should be, the data of your shipment should be even sent to FDA for further review. Now, FDA generally reviews the notification through their electronic entry review system. So entry process through the system will be electronic screened by FDA against the criteria. So it's often easier and faster if you submit all the information at the time of entry through the electronic system. Then you just wait until you find out you have FDA holds, and you need to submit additional information to FDA. If you do encounter an FDA hold, it's very important to respond in a timely manner for any request by FDA for the additional information. And I believe Jessica will get into what is the intended use statement for all these imports. Often the compliance officer or the HU officer will advise all the importer record to be prepared with such intended use statement and supporting evidence. And once it's being requested, you can submit through the system.
So then, so after it's being held, there's, the FDA makes an ultimate decision whether to release or detain it. If the product is detained, I know you have these different elements here, but what really does, what can the importer do next after it's been detained?
Yes, so the detention is not the ultimate decision. It's when the product appears to be in violation. So the importer worker has a chance to submit the evidence to overcome the appearance of violation or submit the reconditioning application, as I just mentioned. So it really depends on what is involved. A lot of times, a laboratory testing report might be helpful too, to prove the substances involved or contained in the product that is indeed to be used for a stated purpose. And I would like to add that if ever after the detention, the FDA is still not satisfied and it gets to a refusal of entry, then the importer really just have down to two options: is either to destroy it or export the product back to the country where it comes from within 90 days. And if the importer worker refuses to do so, then the customer might request to redeliver the product to a approved location at the port of entry within 90 days. If the importer worker still doesn't want to do that, then the CBP could have authority to request or to impose the liquidated damages against the form of the entry. I think my slides are, I will hand it back the floor to Jessica to talk about some more about the food products and drug and medical devices.
Sure. So now we can sort of get into some of the specific product requirements. Food products are subject to some general reporting requirements. As listed here, facilities that produce, store, or handle the products must be registered with the FDA. They must also designate a U.S. agent to handle communications with the agency. There must be prior notice of an incoming shipment. Obviously adequate labeling, and again, those affirmation of compliance codes. In addition, in 2011, the agency, in an effort to sort of shift the focus from responding to any contamination or violations to preventing it, they also required an importer to name any country where the product was previously refused. Next slide. So these are just some examples of food products that would be subject to prior notice. While not included on this list, one that I often see in import alerts, which Michelle mentioned earlier, is infant formula, which obviously the labeling of that is pretty important and can come in and without the appropriate labeling, and FDA will seize the product. Next slide.
Jessica, one thing I don't see on here is our meat products. How are those regulated?
Sure. So meat, poultry, and processed egg products are often are regulated by USDA in conjunction with CBP. In addition to that, they may require other health permits, certificates, or other statements from their country of origin. Okay. FDA has limited resources, so they actually only inspect 1% of the 60 million tons of food imported each year. But it's important to pay attention to common compliance areas because the agency tends to focus on foods and firms kind of prone to violation. So some of the common food compliance errors are food products that are adulterated or misbranded, submission of inaccurate data entry, and labeling issues. Next slide. Drugs that are imported to the U.S. obviously must meet FDA standards for quality, safety, and effectiveness. And again, may be refused entry if it's adulterated, misbranded, or unapproved. In some instances, FDA will grant pre-launch information requests, or PLAIR, to allow sponsors anticipating approval of a drug application to import unapproved finished drug products in order to prepare for a market launch. Drug importation includes prescription medicine, investigational new drug products, and over-the-counter medicines. Next slide. In addition to FDA standards for safety and effectiveness, FDA will verify the following drug requirements and compliance using the information provided in the importer's entry transmission. So registration and listing, that FDA approval, drug labeling, GMPs, and then the product-specific entry information and information on the importer. Okay, next slide. Medical devices. So surprisingly, and I wouldn't think of this off the top of my head, but medical devices makes up more than 50% of the annual products, FDA regulated imported products into the US. Next slide. When dealing with device importations, it's important to know device classes. Class 1 devices are sort of subject to general controls by FDA, which are provisions in the FDA&C Act applicable to adulteration, misbranding, registration and listing, GMPs, sort of basic requirements. Examples of these include bandages, tongue depressors, devices that are not intended to support or prolong life. Class 2 devices must conform to general and special controls, meaning they must address specific risks and often require a 501(k) submission. Examples of these are catheters and wheelchairs. And then class 3 devices are subject to general controls and pre-market approval, which is sort of required scientific review. And these are devices where there's not enough information to assure safety through general and special controls. And examples include pacemakers and breast implants.
So I have a quick question. Sorry, Jessica. These classes, medical devices in a certain category are class 1, class 2, class 3. So how does that relate to sort of upon import? What does it mean for the products when they are importing those products?
Sure. So depending on the class of the medical device, it will directly relate to determining what information FDA will require for that product. And kind of commonsensically, you know, tongue depressors will have less requirements than pacemakers that are coming into the country. So then there is specific data required by FDA for medical devices. These are some examples, a registration and listing number, and then if applicable, an investigational device information, a pre-market number, or then component affirmation, basically affirming it's a component coming into the US that will be used later in a medical device, or it's the medical device itself coming into the country. Something else that you often don't think of with medical devices is that included in that is also radiation emitting electronic products. So that covers the specifics of some of these FDA regulated products, and then I will turn it over to Michelle to go into depth in tobacco requirements.
Thanks, Jessica. So next we will talk about the tobacco products. Tobacco products are now to be one of the areas that we have most trending, one of the most trending import issues for the FDA regulated products because of the growth of the deemed tobacco products industries and the cannabis industries when they share they use almost identical vaporizers, but they all have different nature in terms of whether they fit in the tobacco products or not, and such that they will be subject to entirely different regulatory regimen. And the tobacco products, of course, will be subject to the FDA entry review process, whereas the non-tobacco products will not be. Now, FDA has very stringent regulatory requirements for pre-marketing approval and warning and labeling requirements for tobacco products. For any tobacco products that was not commercially marketed in the United States as of February 15, 2007, or any modification of the products where the modified products was not commercially marketed in the United States as of February 15, 2007, i.e. they are not grandfathered tobacco products. The pre-marketing approval will be required to import, sell, and distribute these products, unless the FDA issues an order and finding the product is either substantially equivalent or they are exempted from the requirements of substantial equivalence. Now, Dimming Rule, FDA issued a Dimming Rule in 2016, which took effect on August 8, 2016. That Dimming Rule extended FDA's authority to additional tobacco products. All these products, such as ENDS products, which is the electronic nicotine delivery systems that deliver aerosolized e-liquid when inhaled, cigars, hookah tobacco, and pipe tobacco, including their components and parts. All these products called DIM products. When the Dimming Rule comes out, that suddenly impose many more complications in terms of the importing process for the tobacco products and similar products with a similar look, which I'm going to talk about in the next 2 slides. Now, imported tobacco products are subject to refusal of permission if they are or appear to be adulterated or misbranded. In this case, if they lack pre-marketing approval. Now, as I mentioned earlier at the webinar, all FDA-regulated products shall submit their country of production, FDA product code, intended use code, branded name, or commercial name of the product. Tobacco product is not different from any other FDA-regulated products in this aspect, but there are 2 types of optional data elements that we are often asked about, and I would like to highlight here, which includes first, FDA establishment identification, FEI number. This is a unique number issued by FDA to track the inspection and regulated establishment of the facility. Now, this number is not required by FDA to import tobacco products, but if an importer has the FEI number, FDA encourages the importers to submit this into ACE. Now, I do want to highlight that at this time, foreign establishment is not required to register unless and until FDA issues regulations establishing such requirements. So many times, our clients who are the importers will ask us, where can I find the FEI number for my foreign factory? There probably is none of this number existing. Now, similarly, the affirmation of compliance code that are required for other FDA-regulated products, which is the data element used to indicate the compliance with the product with the FDA requirement, is also optional for tobacco products at this time. Now, this doesn't mean tobacco products are not required to meet the FDA importing requirements. It simply means that they are not required to enter this number. However, the AOC number, if the importer record does have this number, they should submit, they are highly recommended to submit this number into ACE, which will expedite the FDA entry review process. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the import alerts for tobacco products. For a long time, FDA had issued many import alerts pertaining to different tobacco products. For example, there are the import alerts for cigarettes or any or their component parts that contain a characterizing flavor other than tobacco or menthol, like also cigarettes, tobacco, smokeless tobacco, or roll your own tobacco products that are labeled or advertised using the descriptors light, low, or mild without an authorizing FDA order, or the smokeless tobacco products without required warning label, or some tobacco products found to be not substantially equivalent. And last, maybe some of the regulated tobacco products for non-payment of user fees. I would say this deemed tobacco products at this time are not required to pay the user fees, but FDA has issued additional import alerts for lack of pre-marketing approval for deemed products and ENDS products, which are again the electronic nicotine delivery systems that deliver the aerosolized e-liquid when inhaled, which typically so-called the e-cigarettes. Now, there are import alert 9806 pertains to the entire category for for the deemed products. 9807 pertains to the smaller category of ENDS products for the exact same reason, lack of the pre-marketing approval. But because of the issuance of the deeming rule was made in a time that there was already a lot of deemed products marketing in the United States. So there are delays. The compliance dates have been delayed until last year, September the 9th. FDA is in the process of reviewing a lot of this application for pre-marketing approvals. So even though FDA had issued 2 import alerts for lack of the pre-marketing approval, the so-called list of the products that are subject to detention without physical examination under these 2 import alerts are not complete. And as a matter of fact, if you look at them, they're only maybe a dozen products or several products. And however, in reality, there were only several or 1 or 2 one ENDS product that have been approved right now by FDA, and not many newly deemed tobacco products have been approved by FDA. So the list under this import alerts are definitely not complete, and when FDA will issue the complete list remains to be seen. Now there is another import alert that allows FDA to detain certain regulated tobacco products that do not meet the labeling requirements. Typically, the requirements provided under Section 903, which require the importer record, requires the importer record to identify the name and place of address of the tobacco product manufacturer, packer, or distributor, or an accurate statement of the quantity of the contents in terms of the weight, measure, and numerical account of the nicotine, and the statement that says that the product is, the sale only allowed in the United States. Now, a lot of our clients actually, their products maybe just miss label, miss the element of the labeling for 1 or 2. When that happens, what they can do, this is a great example. They can submit a reconditioning application and asking FDA saying, look, I have put this statement, the sale only allowed in the United States on our labeling. Would this now be in compliance with FDA's requirements? FDA has discretion and say yes or not. If FDA decides that it's still not in compliance with the labeling requirements, they can issue a refusal for admission for the entry, and then the importer record then will have just either 2 options, either destroy the shipments or export them back to where it comes. Many times our clients will find that they would just want to take the shipments back and redo it in the factory because the shipment volume is too much for them to relabel and reconditioning all of them at the port of entry inside the United States. So I do want to turn to the next slide. If Samir, you don't have any questions.
Yeah, no, I was just going to jump in, Michelle. Well, first of all, for those of you listening, please again enter your questions in the chat box or the question box provided on the right side of your screen. I have a question. I know you were talking specifically about import alerts related to the tobacco products, but can you talk generally sort of, how these import alerts are instituted by Customs or FDA, and what types of import alerts there are?
So FDA issues a wide variety of import alerts for different reasons. As to how they apply to the products, they can be either countrywide, such as a whole country's products cannot come in except the products, certain products identified on the green list, then those products will be green lighted to come in. Or they can be manufacturer or shipper specific. For example, for the import alerts under 9807 and 9806 that I just mentioned, for lack of pre-marketing approval for the DIM products and ENDS products, they are the FDA, how the FDA goes about it is just to issue a red list, basically identifying the certain products to specific manufacturers that they cannot come in or they will be detained without physical detention, unless they can file additional evidence to prove or to overcome the appearance of violation. Or the import alert could be worldwide alert, like there's multiple countries for certain imports cannot come in the United States. So that's how generally FDA would conduct the import alerts in conjunction with CBP.
And I guess, have you seen certain trends with import alerts in terms of more and more coming out recently and more specifically related to certain products or to certain countries, or what have you seen recently?
As of 2 days ago, for the labeling requirements, I see that FDA is slightly adding some products onto it, and for the basis of the that they don't meet the labeling requirements, which included manufacturer, where the location the manufacturer is based, or the packer or distributor is based, whether they have an accurate statement of the quantity of the contents, and whether they make it clear that the sale is only allowed in the United States. Now that's easier for the importer record to correct them. For the importer and the import alerts for lack of pre-marketing approval for the ENDS products and the DIM products, like I said, it's still in the process of that. FDA is still in the process of issuing the list of all the red list, the list of the product that will be subject to detention without physical examination, or they might change the import alerts by issuing a ban of all the products except a certain products on the green list, which I think at this point that FDA hasn't done anything yet. But I believe FDA may be we're likely to do something in the first half of next year, based on my experience and dealing with FDA. That's what I believe will happen. But as of now, they are basically, it's still relatively quiet for the import alerts enforcement actions. Next one is a very interesting topic. It's a great example showing the tension for a product that is FDA regulated and when it is not. For vaporizers, recently e-vaporizers are very popular, and there are different vaporizers. There are e-cigarettes that are used for tobacco, nicotine containing substances, and there are vaporizers that are used for CBD containing e-liquids or the synthetic nicotine e-liquids. Now, because all these products share identical or similar physical attributes, they are all falling under the same tariff classification, like in terms of for the duty and tax collections. However, based on their intended use, the likelihood of whether they can be used with any nicotine containing substances, they could be subject to entirely different regulatory requirements. For example, an FDA made it has stated about in their website that it is possible that a disposable closed system that contains an e-liquid with zero nicotine or synthetic nicotine would not be regulated as a tobacco product if it's not intended or reasonably be expected to use in such a fashion. Which this statement really tells you, even though there is still a case-to-case determination, this statement tells you that the intended use of vaporizers matters. Because if a vaporizer, even they are identical device, but if they are a closed system, when they are imported into the United States, they contain a CBD containing, or the cannabis containing e-liquids, or any e-liquid that contains zero tobacco-derived nicotine, or all the nicotine was completely derived from a laboratory process that is not tobacco plant derived, then there is a strong argument to say that this product is not FDA regulated, especially if it's a closed system. Means that people use it and then dump it. So when that happens, that the broker will have to decide, the broker can assist the importer worker to decide the tariff classification. However, the tariff classification is not determinative of the FDA flag that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, which will trigger a different review process, right? CBD devices will not be subject to additional FDA review process, even though they are falling under the same tariff classification like the ENDS products. And ENDS product will be subject to additional FDA review process, which can be prolonged, and because of the many different regulatory requirements as of now, and that has been imposed by the rules. However, that doesn't mean that when a product is not FDA regulated, they will not be subject to any additional importing requirements. We have encountered cases where our clients' cannabis vaporizers, which are not tobacco products, and thus they have at least they won't be regulated as tobacco products. They have been seized by customs based on a causes that they are unlawful importation of drug paraphernalia. So it's just a great example that showing that it's critical to find out whether your products are FDA, or whether are FDA regulated, whether they are tobacco products. And and many times just looking at the tariff classification won't tell you the answer. So it will be, we always often advise our clients to engage counsel to determine the intended use of the products. This will not only help you to expedite the FDA review process, but also will avoid many pitfalls that an importer worker could potentially face. Now, I think I have complete my portion of tobacco product slides, and next come back to Samir to see if whether you have any additional questions, or whether the audience has any additional questions.
Yeah, we have received a few questions. So Jessica, are you on there? We can hear you, Jessica. We just can't see you.
Can you hear me? Sorry,
yes.
I'm having technical difficulties. I'm trying to get my camera back up.
Well, so we have one question. We have a couple questions here. Some of them have to do with detention and entry. First one, sort of, is there a specific time frame a company or an importer has to reply if FDA detains an entry? And maybe you want to go a little bit further, Michelle, and talk a little bit about, I know you talked about sort of that process, but maybe the time frames from holding, how long do you have to respond, and then detention, and then if it's ruled that it is detained, and the time frame for that as well.
So FDA typically will provide a specific day for you to respond to the notice of detention, and you will need to either respond by that day or apply for extensions. Now, when asked, often we are asked, like, is there a certain time limit for FDA to make a decision to find out whether they would like to continue to detain my products or release my products? unfortunately, there is no time limit for FDA to review the entry. But once they decide to refuse the entry for admission, the importer record have 90 days to add on to it. So I think it's really critical to timely submit the information that FDA requested, to engage counsel to identify the appropriate FDA person to understand first why the product or the shipment has been detained or delayed, and what you can do to overcome the appearance of violation, or whether it's appropriate for you to file a recondition application to basically to bring the products back into compliance.
Okay, good, thank you. So next question, and maybe this is for Jessica. It says, is animal fat, which is to be used to produce biodiesel, is that regulated by the FDA?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Let's move on to the next question. I'll see if I can circle back. I just want to confirm my thinking.
We can follow up. We can follow up after as well if we can't answer right now.
Great question.
So then the next one is, if an entry has received an FDA may proceed, but it is determined that an FDA data point needs updating or correction, so what's the recommended process to correct this reporting error or this reporting with the FDA? Maybe for Jessica?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. So if an entry has received an FDA may proceed, but it is determined that an FDA data point needs updating or correcting, what's the recommended process to correct this reporting with the FDA?
Communicate directly with the FDA, probably through your customs broker, and let them know, if it's a small data point that needs to be moved, they'd be happy to work with you to correct.
Is that how often? That's how often we handle it as well, right? Sorry, another one for you, Jessica. And in fact, this is something that I've been wondering about. So, I saw that last week, President Biden nominated Dr. Robert Califf, to lead the FDA. I know he had previously held that same position.
Yeah.
So what do you see going forward if he's eventually confirmed as FDA commissioner?
Sure. So that's a great question. Generally as related to imports, I can't think that it will have a huge impact. I know generally he's taken a great approach to trying new drug therapies and cures. So I would see sort of more activity on that end. I also know he's been a little harsh on tobacco. I believe he's a former cardiologist, has a support of tobacco, the campaign for tobacco-free kids and other groups. So those are my two sort of thoughts off the top of my head.
Okay. So you were saying that you think he's going to be more sort of lenient as it relates to drug therapies, but more harsh when it comes to tobacco products? Yeah,
I mean, just sort of encouraging sort of new outside the box thinking, in some of the new diseases that we see where maybe a cure isn't, or a treatment isn't well solidified. Maybe sort of, I hesitate to say experimental, but just some new sort of trials with new therapies.
Okay. I do have another question in the box here. Let's see. These are tough questions. So how does an importer, and again, if we can't answer it in this forum, we can answer it afterwards as well, but how does an importer identify, quote, approved commodities over, quote, unapproved commodities? Which might require, so the unapproved commodities, which might require some additional reporting from an importer export perspective.
I will try to explain this. There is approved reporting or unapproved reporting. Is that a question?
Yeah, it's basically approved commodities versus unapproved commodities.
Okay, if they, because the question, I would love to get some clarification on what the approved here really means. But then, like I said, affirmation of the compliance code will tell you if you think you're compliant, which will expedite the review process a lot. It is not required for every single FDA regulated product. But if you do have the affirmation of confirmation code, that will help expedite the review process a lot. I'm not sure if I answered the audience question here when it meant when you were referring to the approved commodity and unapproved commodity.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. It's fine. Okay. Sorry, another question just popped up. 1 second. Okay, so this relates to sort of a best practice question. So if from FDA's perspective, what are the best practices related to reporting sort of compliance with the regulations if they're not mandatory, like similar to the pre-market approval? I'm trying to sort of synthesize this question during import entry process. So it's best practices of reporting compliance if it's not necessarily mandatory to do so.
So I can start that one, and then I'll toss it to you, Michelle. And again, I'm sorry for my camera, but you know, best practices, I would say if it's an FDA recommendation and you can follow it, I would. I mean, I think the key here is to expedite the entry process, and by following their recommendations, you know, in the form of guidances per se, it would help do that.
Yeah, I would say the best practice would start with the determination of what's the correct tariff classification of your product and what's correct FDA flag, associated flag, because it will even determine whether the broker needs to submit the entry information or additional entry information or submit the prior notice and so on. And I have talked to a few officers, and his recommendation for best practice is that to prepare an intended use statement and supporting documents. And when needed, you can quickly either upload those documents to the electronic system, or you just send those to your broker if you're comfortable about them and submit them with your entry. That will expedite a lot on the entry process for the FDA regulated products.
Good. All right. Questions are flying in. Sorry. If a company is using a third party who's acting as sort of importer of record for those products, the third party is acting as importer of record. How does the manufacturer or the other company sort of retain what liability or what things should they be thinking about when a third party is acting as the importer of record?
I think this question, Samir, you can answer as well if I'm on here. The ultimate responsibility for all this, you know, violations of the important requirements, payment of duties, even liquidated damages, everything comes with the importer of record. So if you decide to be importer of record, there is a burden on your shoulder to carry out the reasonable duty, to review your entry information, not just to rely on the broker to submit all the information for you, even though they can do many things for you. You will be the person who's ultimately responsible. So when you have a third party that acts as the importer of record, then unfortunately the importer of record will be the person who's on the hook.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, from our perspective, the importer of record is the one ultimately responsible for compliance with the customs regulations, customs laws and regulations. But at the same time, because often we're asked this question sort of coming at it from a different angle when the importer of record is using a broker or some other third party on their behalf to import the product or to provide information to customs or in the ACE portal or what have you. But even coming at it from the other angle, when there is a sort of a manufacturer or a different company that is using a third party to act as importer of record, because that importer of record retains some benefit in the transaction, if that importer of record is relying on information that is being provided by a company, there's oftentimes certain, private causes of action. There's oftentimes there's usually a contract that's in place, so it becomes a contractual issue rather than sort of a regulatory one. But the reality is often, customs, they want the importer of records information on the documentation because that's who they go after.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely right.
I agree with Samir that it's often become a contractual issue, because even though sometimes the importer of record will pay the duties and be on the hook, it really depends on whether who ultimately pays the duties in terms of the price, and also whether the manufacturer need to submit the funds for the bond, for the entry, and many things like that. I do want to clarify that oftentimes people will misunderstand the entry filer as with the importer of record. The importer of record is not necessarily the entry filer. The entry filer typically is the custom broker who has the filer code, but doesn't mean that the broker is the importer of record that will be responsible for all these liabilities.
That's right. Oh, there you go. So we're coming up on 2 o'clock, so I think we'll close there. And I believe we got through most of the questions. Any questions that we didn't get through, we will, contact you and respond over email. If you require any additional information, please contact Michelle, Jessica, or myself regarding any of these issues that we discussed today. I do want to do a quick little small plug for our SmarTrade blog. If you're not currently receiving our updates and invitations, I invite you to go to the Thompson Hine website at thompsonhinesmarttrade.com and subscribe to the blog. It's a really great way to stay up to date on all things related to international trade, including a lot of the issues we talked about today. Thanks again. And as far as CLE is concerned, the CLE today, for today's program, the tracking code is TH1117. So I guess that's the Thompson Hine, or TH1117 date, TH1117. Thanks again, Michelle. Thank you, Jessica. And thanks to all of our attendees for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Thanks so much.
Thank you.